What if the answer to humanity's biggest mystery is already inside you? Not in some ancient monument or lost city, but right there in your cells, logged in a lab, maybe even tucked away on a hard drive out of sight. And what if those old clay tablets from Mesopotamia, pressed 5,000 years ago, weren't just myths? What if they were records, precise accounts of something real, that modern genetics is only now starting to decipher? Imagine it, under the harsh lights of university archives, and in the quiet hum of gene sequencing labs, two worlds are brushing up against each other. They're separated by thousands of years, but joined by one stubborn question: who made us? And what if the answer has always been right in front of us, spelled out in the world's oldest script and coded in our DNA? Before we dive into this strange crossroads of ancient stories and cutting-edge science, get comfortable. If this question sparks your curiosity, hit like. Stick around if you love histories that don't play by the usual rules. And hey, if you're still with me as the night drags on, tell me in the comments where you are and what hour you're keeping. I like the idea of this mystery stretching across time zones, whispered into the dark just before morning. Our story doesn't start in a dusty tomb or a grand temple. It begins in a lab. In 2003, researchers at the National Human Genome Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, finished the Human Genome Project. 13 years, teams from all over the world, and they finally mapped out the entire human genetic code, 3 billion base pairs. Basically, they cracked the instruction manual for building a human. Scientists called it one of the greatest achievements in history. For the first time, we could actually read the book of life, written in our own cells. But once they dug into the data, things got weird. The human genome wasn't a neat, organized library. It was messy, full of what scientists first dismissed as junk DNA, huge stretches of genetic code that didn't seem to do anything. They didn't build proteins, didn't seem to have a purpose, and didn't fit with what evolution was supposed to do. Almost 98% of our DNA was this so-called junk. Evolution should have cleaned that up right. Yet there it was, hanging on generation after generation, using up space and resources. Over the next 20 years, as sequencing tech got better and analysis went deeper, scientists realized the junk wasn't junk. A lot of it actually regulates how and when genes turn on or off. Some sequences are leftovers from ancient viruses that infected our ancestors and managed to stick around. Other parts are still a mystery. No one knows what they do or why they're there. But one discovery stood out. The human genome showed signs of sudden, dramatic changes, way too quick for evolution's usual slow crawl. These changes didn't look random. They looked like someone had engineered them. Jump to 2011. A group of geneticists at UC San Francisco published a study on the FOXP2 gene, often called the language gene. It plays a huge part in letting us speak and communicate. You'll find FOXP2 in all sorts of animals: apes, mice, birds, even fish. But the human version has two specific mutations that don't show up in any other primate. These changes happened within the last 200,000 years, a blink in evolutionary time. And they changed everything. Suddenly, we had the fine motor control for speech, the brain power for grammar and syntax, and the wiring for picking up language. What really rattled scientists wasn't just the effect, but the speed. 2 exact mutations in just the right spots at just the right time, leading to abilities no other species has. The odds of that happening by chance are tiny. Evolution can explain how good mutations spread, but it stumbles over how these pinpoint changes popped up so fast. It almost looks like someone opened up the human genome, found the exact spots to tweak, and made the edits. The researchers put their findings out there in respected journals. People cited the paper, talked about it, folded it into the steady flow of genetic research, and then everyone just moved on. The ideas were too weird, too unsettling to really chase down. If FOXP2 didn't change little by little but instead jumped, suddenly and with precision, what triggered that? The safe answer was always, we just don't get the mechanism yet. Maybe someday, future discoveries would show us some natural process behind those targeted mutations. But there was another answer, the one nobody dared say in a serious setting. The changes looked deliberate. In a quiet, perfectly temperature-controlled room at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, thousands of Sumerian clay tablets sit in foam-padded trays. Most came out of the ground back in the early 1900s, dug up from the ruins of Nippur, Ur, and Lagash. They're packed with everything: lists of grain, prescriptions, notes on the stars. And among them, cataloged and translated ages ago, you'll find texts about the creation of humanity. They don't sound anything like the dreamy myths from other ancient cultures. Take the Atrahasis epic. It's from around 1800 BCE, but it comes from even older stories. The story starts with a problem. The junior gods, the Igigi, are burned out. They've been digging canals, clearing rivers, building temples, and just keeping the whole show running. After 3,600 years, one full SAR cycle, they snap. They burn their tools and demand a break. The senior gods call a meeting. They need laborers, but nobody wants to force divine beings into endless hard work. So Enki, the wise one, has an idea. Let's have a birth goddess create workers, the Lulu, who will take over this burden. But the story doesn't go the snap-your-fingers instant creation route. It walks through a process. The goddess Nintu, also known as Bottleneck, teams up with Enki to make the first prototype. They grab clay from the Apsu, the primal waters. They mix it with the blood of Wheela, a slain god whose Teramu, his intelligence or essence, gives the mix something extra. That word, Teramu, matters. It isn't talking about a soul in the usual sense. It means smarts, consciousness, understanding. Something you can pass on. So Nintu gets to work. She pinches off bits of clay, blends in the divine essence, shapes them into forms, but early attempts flop. The Enki and Ninmah story, written on other tablets from Nippur, spells this out in almost clinical detail. Ninmah makes a being, but it can't control its body. Enki finds it a job where that doesn't matter. Next, she creates another. This one can't speak clearly. Fine, Enki says, make it a musician. Another one can't see well. Enki gives it a role that doesn't need eyesight. The texts go on like this. Flawed prototypes, each one with its own limitations, each one slotted into a job that fits. This isn't poetry. It reads like a quality control checklist. Try, fail, adapt, repeat. Eventually, Nintu and Enki get it right. They figure out how to make humans who can work, reproduce, and take care of themselves. The story lists 14 birth goddesses, 7 for males, 7 for females, so they end up with a whole population, not just a single couple. The tone stays procedural. Mix this, shape that, watch what happens, tweak the process, try again. For over 100 years, scholars have called these stories mythology. Just ancient people spinning tales to make sense of existence, telling themselves stories about gods as craftsmen. But what if the Sumerians were actually trying to record something they saw, or knowledge they'd inherited, using the only language they had? What if gods mixing clay with essence was their way of describing a biological process they noticed but couldn't explain? What if all the trial and error, the botched first attempts, the slow improvements, what if that was their attempt to pass down the memory of something real? Look at the similarities. Modern genetics tells us humans came from tweaks to existing DNA. The Sumerians had their own story, humans created by mixing earth with a touch of the divine. Science talks about sudden changes, like the FOXP2 gene, that sparked abilities only humans have. The Sumerians said the key was Teramu, a spark of intelligence that turned clay into real thinking beings. Genetics shows our evolution wasn't always slow and steady. Sometimes big leaps happened. The Sumerians, for their part, spoke of trial and error, several failed attempts, and finally, humans that actually worked. Sure, the language is different. Their worldviews couldn't be further apart, but if you look past that, the structure lines up. Both describe a deliberate process. Both talk about specific changes made for a reason to create something new. And in both, things happened faster than you'd expect if nature just plodded along on its own. Jump to 2018. Researchers at the Weizmann Institute in Israel dug into the DNA of thousands of people from all over the world. They expected to find big differences. After all, humans have been scattered and separate for ages. But that's not what they saw. Instead, they found that everyone is way more similar genetically than they should be if we'd all gone our separate ways for tens of thousands of years. Here, why humans went through what geneticists call a population bottleneck. At some point, our numbers crashed hard. Maybe as few as 10,000 humans were left, maybe even less. This happened between 50 and 70,000 years ago. The evidence is still there, written in our DNA. Not a lot of variety, even today. Usually, bottlenecks happen because of disasters. Think volcanic eruptions, ice ages, pandemics, stuff that wipes out almost everyone, leaving a handful to start over. The Toba supervolcano, which blew its top about 74,000 years ago, is a prime suspect. It spewed so much ash that the planet cooled, ecosystems broke down, food vanished, and early humans, already having a rough time, barely made it through. But here's the weird part. When scientists checked which genes survived the bottleneck, they found something odd. The survivors didn't just have random traits. Their genes were stacked in favor of things like brain power, staying healthy, and making energy work more efficiently. It's as if only the people with just the right skills pulled through. Natural selection explains a lot. The toughest, smartest, or luckiest people survived and passed on their genes. But the details are striking. The mutations that got through weren't just handy. They were exactly the ones that let us talk, think in the abstract, invent things, and do all the stuff that makes humans, well, human. And the timing, that's interesting too. Archaeological finds show that around 70,000 years ago, right after this bottleneck, humans started acting very differently. For ages, our ancestors made simple tools, wandered in small groups, and left behind little sign of abstract thought. Then, almost overnight, they made art, beads, carvings, painted caves. Burials became complicated, hinting at beliefs about life after death. Tools got fancy and specialized. Trade networks grew, moving materials across huge distances. Archaeologists call this the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. That's when humans started behaving in ways we'd recognize today. Our bodies had been modern for a long time, 300,000 years more or less. But the minds, the behaviors, the culture that define us, those arrived much later, and they showed up suddenly, right when the genetic bottleneck happened. Most people say the population bottleneck and the so-called behavioral revolution just happened to overlap, a weird coincidence. Or maybe the disaster that nearly wiped us out also pushed our brains to evolve faster. But there's another angle, one that's hard to ignore once you start noticing the hints in the evidence. What if the bottleneck wasn't just a numbers game, not just a natural culling? What if it was a selection event, but one that wasn't entirely natural, something more intentional? Down in the basement of the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, there's this clay prism. The label says A7815. It's kept chilled, carefully monitored. If you look closely, it's a copy of the Sumerian king list, carved around 2100 BCE. The list runs through every king who ruled in Mesopotamia, all the way back to the moment kingship supposedly descended from heaven. People love to point out how absurd the reigns are. Kings ruling for tens of thousands of years, until a great flood slices history in two. But buried in that list, past all the talk about mythical ages and impossible calendars, there's a line people tend to miss. After listing the 8 kings before the flood, the text drops a single phrase. Then the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over, when kingship was lowered from heaven again, the kingship was in Kish. That word, again, matters. It's not just repetition. Kingship came down from heaven once to kickstart the world. Then the flood hit, everything changed, and kingship came down again to put things back together. You look at the story, and it's not just a tale about disaster and recovery. It's a cycle: foundation, collapse, restoration. Like the flood wasn't just some accident of nature, it was a reset. Something so big, only the gods could fix it. And when you line up the Sumerian stories with what we know about genetic bottlenecks and bursts of human creativity, the overlap gets hard to brush off. Take the Eridu Genesis, one of the oldest flood stories we've got. It paints a world before disaster, 5 cities, each run by an Anunnaki god, people multiplying everywhere. Life is good, maybe too good. Then comes the problem. Humans are noisy. The gods can't stand it. Population is out of control. Order breaks down. Enlil, the top god, decides it's time for a flood. Wipe the slate clean. But Enki, god of wisdom, isn't on board with wiping everyone out. He tips off Ziusudra, king of Shirapak. Build a boat, he says, save yourself. But don't just save your life, save culture, knowledge, the stuff that makes humans more than just animals. So Ziusudra survives, the flood ends. When he steps back onto land, the gods make a deal. Humanity goes on, but things are different now. People won't live as long. The gods won't be so close. The rules have changed. The text doesn't describe this as punishment. It's more like a new agreement. The survivors and the gods work out new terms. And the Sumerians never pretend that the people after the flood are the same as before. Something fundamental shifted. The kings after the flood don't reign for ages. That spark, the divine whatever that let people live forever, is gone. Mortality takes over. So what if all these flood stories aren't just about water at all? What if they're memories of a real, near-extinction event? A population bottleneck that almost erased us, leaving just a handful of survivors whose descendants became everyone alive today. And what if the Sumerians, with their talk of divine intervention and deliberately reshaping humanity after disaster, held on to something the other stories lost along the way? Jump to 2012. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology make a discovery that flips our family tree upside down. They dig ancient DNA out of fossils and find that modern humans didn't evolve in some neat little bubble. We mixed with other human species. Non-African populations, about 2% Neanderthal DNA. People in Asia and Oceania. They've got genetic traces from Denisovans, a mysterious group we barely know, except for a few scraps of bone in a Siberian cave. And the DNA hints at even more unknown ghost populations. Their genes are still in us, even if their bones are long gone. These discoveries blew apart the old, tidy story of human evolution. Turns out, we didn't march forward in a single line, getting smarter and more modern with each step. Instead, we're the product of a messy, tangled web. Our ancestors mixed and mingled with other human-like groups. Some survived, some vanished, but their DNA still lingers in us. And the way those genes show up isn't random. The Neanderthal and Denisovan bits in our DNA tend to cluster in certain areas, shaping things like our immune systems, skin color, how we handle high altitudes, even our metabolism. It's almost like nature handpicked certain genetic traits from these ancient cousins because they gave us a leg up. Our ancestors met these other hominins, had kids together, and those kids inherited a genetic toolkit built from more than one lineage. Nobody planned it, obviously. It was just natural selection doing its thing, working with the results of all that interbreeding. The end result: our DNA is a patchwork, a mosaic made up of pieces from different sources. Now think about the Sumerian creation stories. They don't say humans popped into existence out of nowhere. Instead, they talk about people being shaped from clay mixed with some kind of divine spark. 2 ingredients coming together to create something new. Maybe the clay stands for the human-like populations already around, and the divine essence is something else, genetic material from a source the Sumerians couldn't quite name, but sensed was something different. The Atrahasis epic even gets specific. The divine essence comes from the blood of Willa, a god who was sacrificed. Back then, blood meant life, identity, inheritance. So when they say the gods mixed clay with divine blood, maybe they're holding onto a memory, however dim, of different groups mixing their DNA. The result: a new kind of human with abilities neither original group had on its own. Sure, this idea asks for a leap of imagination. It asks us to believe the Sumerians somehow grasped, at least in a cloudy way, biological processes we only figured out after inventing modern genetics. But just look at what we know about ancient knowledge. The Sumerians tracked Venus with uncanny accuracy, on par with what our telescopes can do. Their math still shapes how we tell time. They practiced medicine using compounds that actually worked. They knew things a Bronze Age culture supposedly shouldn't, but the evidence is right there. Maybe they didn't come up with it all on their own. Maybe they inherited some of it from an even older civilization, one that came before a great catastrophe, before humans almost died out. Maybe that lost culture understood genetics in ways we're only now beginning to rediscover. And maybe those creation stories are their way of passing on that knowledge, told in the only language they had, gods and clay, because they didn't have words for genes or DNA. Jump to 2016. George Church at Harvard grabs headlines by saying he wants to bring back extinct species with genetic engineering. Using CRISPR, he and his team plan to edit the DNA of Asian elephants, adding mammoth genes until they'd recreated something close enough to a real living mammoth. They figure out the genetic differences, make the right edits, and if it all worked, grow an animal that hasn't walked the earth in thousands of years. Suddenly, everyone was debating the ethics. Should we bring back animals we drove extinct? What would happen to the environment? But beneath all that noise, a quieter question lurked. If we can edit genes to revive lost species, what's stopping us from designing new ones? Could we build organisms with traits no creature has ever had? In a way, could we do what those ancient stories describe? Mix what already exists with something brand new and create life that's never been seen before. Church didn't just speculate. He admitted it's possible, at least in theory. CRISPR lets scientists slice and tweak DNA with surprising precision. They can cut out genes, drop in new ones, or mess with the switches that decide when and how genes do their thing. Sure, the technology's still a bit rough around the edges, and honestly, we're just scratching the surface of how genes interact to build complex traits. But things are moving fast. And that pace stirs up a weird question no one's quite comfortable with. If we're starting to engineer living things on purpose, how can we be sure this is the first time anyone's ever done it? Most people would say, look, modern science is the best we've ever had. Earlier civilizations, no matter how clever, simply didn't have the tools or the know-how to mess with DNA. But that idea rests on a pretty big assumption, that progress always moves forward, never backward. History tells a messier story. Civilizations rise, do incredible things, then collapse. Think about the Library of Alexandria going up in flames, the sudden disaster that ended the Bronze Age, or the Maya leaving their cities behind. Stuff gets lost. So what if there was a civilization before some big wipeout, a flood, a catastrophe that nearly ended humanity? If those people had cutting-edge knowledge, maybe even biotech, the disaster wouldn't just have wiped out towns and families. It would have crushed the whole network needed to keep that knowledge alive. Survivors salvage what they can, turning scraps into legends and rituals, passing them down. By the time the Sumerians started writing things down, the original science was probably long gone, just echoes wrapped in myth. But sometimes the basic shape lingers, stories that humans were shaped, not just born, that our origins involved someone tinkering under the hood. Hybrids patched together from Earth and something else. Jump to 2003. The Human Genome Project wraps up, and Yang Huineming helps launch the Beijing Genomics Institute, BGI. In just 20 years, BGI explodes into one of the biggest genomics hubs on Earth, churning out genome sequences and research papers by the truckload. But by 2019, rumors start swirling. People in the field talk quietly about secret programs buried deep inside BGI, projects way beyond just curing disease. The talk is all about experiments editing human DNA for enhancement, not just therapy. Nobody can prove anything. China keeps a tight leash on sensitive science, and anything controversial stays locked down. Still, scientists who have worked with BGI whisper about unpublished data, DNA tweaks that don't match anything found in nature, studies that look more like blueprints for superhumans than cures for patients. Stronger bodies, sharper minds, people built to handle stress and hardship better than the rest of us. Then in 2018, the whispers break into the open. He Jiankui, a Chinese researcher, shocks the world. He announces he used CRISPR to edit the genes of twin girls before they were born, supposedly making them immune to HIV. The backlash is instant and fierce. The scientific community condemns him for crossing a line, experimenting on humans in a way everyone agreed was off-limits. He loses his job, gets arrested, and lands in prison. But the real shock: the tech to edit human DNA isn't science fiction, it's already here. The knowledge is out in the open. The only real obstacles are the rules we make for ourselves, ethics, laws. If one scientist is willing to break those rules in public, how many more are working in the shadows, protected by governments or private money, chasing the dream of enhanced humans? It's not just China. The US has its own secrets. Back in 2004, the Department of Defense kicked off the Human-Assisted Neural Devices program, looking for ways to boost soldiers' abilities with brain implants and gene tweaks. Most details are still classified, but what's leaked shows they were hunting for genes linked to endurance, pain resistance, and faster thinking. The goal was simple: build soldiers who last longer, think smarter, and survive things that would flatten anyone else. Back in 2020, right as the world was locking down, scientists everywhere scrambled to sequence the genome of SARS-CoV-2, the virus behind COVID-19. What they uncovered was weird. The virus had this thing called a furin cleavage site sitting in its genome, something you just don't see in its close coronavirus cousins. That little bit made the virus way better at getting into human cells. And honestly, nobody could come up with a solid, natural explanation for how it got there. The whole thing blew up into a debate. Some researchers said, look, viruses can swap genetic stuff when they infect the same host. Maybe that's how it happened. Others weren't convinced. They noticed the exact sequence in SARS-CoV-2 looked a lot like ones used in labs for research, where scientists spliced them in on purpose. So did COVID-19 come from nature, or did it leak out of a lab? Nobody's really settled that, not with all the politics and half-finished evidence in the way. But here's the real takeaway. We've crossed into a world where the line between what's natural and what's engineered is getting fuzzier by the year. These days, people can design, build, and insert genetic sequences into living things. Labs everywhere do it, whether they're working on medicine, crops, or just basic science. Telling the difference between something nature made and something people tweaked isn't easy. Sometimes it's basically impossible. And if that's where we are today, after just a few decades of genetic technology, imagine a world where people had those tools for centuries or even thousands of years. You'd find engineered fingerprints everywhere, hidden in the DNA, but so old and jumbled up by time and mutations that you'd never spot them unless you knew exactly what to look for, or unless someone left a record behind, something written by the engineers themselves explaining what they did. Maybe the Sumerian tablets are that record, not full-blown technical manuals. Those probably disappeared in some ancient disaster, but scraps of memory, stories passed down for ages before anyone bothered to write them down. They hint that humans were created, that our DNA got tweaked, that we're the result of a project whose details faded away but never quite vanished from memory. Look at how specific those old creation stories get. They don't just say the gods made humans. They walk you through it, mixing ingredients, running experiments, making different versions of people with different traits. They even spell out why the gods needed workers to keep civilization running. That's not how myths usually work. Most myths just have a god say, "Let there be people," and poof, there they are. No effort, no process, just magic. But the Sumerian stories talk about struggle and problem solving. The language is almost technical, and you see this theme pop up again and again in different cities and different eras. The Atrahasis epic, Enki and Ninmah, Eridu-Genesis, they all describe making humans as a step-by-step project, with trial and error and improvement. It's like the memory was so important to them that every school, every temple, every scribe kept the details intact, even as everything else changed. What if they kept teaching it because it was true, not just as a metaphor but as a real historical memory. Humans were made, changed, given abilities our ancestors never had. And the so-called gods who did it, the Anunnaki, maybe they weren't magical beings at all. Maybe they were just a civilization so advanced that, after the world fell apart, people could only describe them in godlike terms. In 1986, Zecharia Sitchin jumped in with his book, The 12th Planet. He argued the Anunnaki were aliens who came to Earth, engineered humans to be workers, and left after some disaster made staying impossible. Sitchin based his ideas on his own readings of Sumerian texts. Most scholars said he was way off. His translations were shaky, his science didn't add up, and his timeline didn't fit what archaeologists know. But despite all that, Sitchin's book sold millions and kicked off a whole wave of ancient astronaut theories that still capture people's imaginations. To be fair, academics had good reasons to criticize Sitchin. He made mistakes. He forced the facts to fit his story. But he did ask a question that won't go away. If the Sumerian texts aren't just old myths, if they're actually trying to record real events, then who were the Anunnaki? Most people will tell you the Anunnaki were just deified ancestors, old Sumerian leaders whose stories grew into legends, then eventually into gods. Or maybe they were really just the sky, the earth, the waters, all wrapped up in human shapes so people could make sense of them. Or maybe they're pure symbols, nothing more than ideas made flesh. The model king, the ideal priestess, the perfect judge. But that's not how the old texts treat them. These stories don't talk about the Anunnaki as vague symbols or metaphors. They give them families, tracing their lineages through the generations. Each one gets a city, a job, real responsibilities. Enki rules over Eridu and fresh water. Enlil runs Nippur and manages the crops. Inanna takes charge of Uruk, and she's got her hands in both love and war. The stories are packed with political drama, councils, arguments, alliances, betrayals. Sometimes the Anunnaki marry humans, and their kids become legendary kings. That level of detail is rare for gods. Usually, ancient deities float above it all, timeless creators or faceless forces locked in endless cycles. The Anunnaki, though, act like real people. They live in certain places at certain times and mix with humans in ways that feel almost historical. They teach farming, invent writing, make laws, organize work crews. Then after the flood, they don't die or get overthrown. They just step back. They leave quietly and let humans take over. You can see the change in the Sumerian king list. Before the flood, kings supposedly ruled for thousands of years. Lifespans that make no sense unless you're talking about gods or some other way of marking time. After the flood, reigns get shorter and shorter until finally you're looking at normal human lives. Something big shifted. The line between gods and humans, once blurry, snapped into place. The Anunnaki, who used to walk among us, faded into the background. So here's a wild thought. What if their withdrawal was real, not just a metaphor? Let's say the Anunnaki were a genuinely advanced group, maybe even capable of messing with human genetics. Hanging around early humans might have become impossible. Too many biological differences, cultural clashes, the headache of a small elite living among millions with stone tools. Then the flood hits. Civilizations wiped out. Survivors scatter to the hills. And when it's all over, the Anunnaki don't come back to rule. Instead, they put humans in charge, hand down kingship from heaven, and pull the strings from behind the curtain. It sounds far-fetched, but honestly, history is full of lost civilizations. The Bronze Age collapse wiped out entire cultures around 1200 BCE. Writing vanished in some places. Trade broke down. Cities emptied. Generations later, people had no idea what their ancestors once knew. If something similar happened even earlier, say, triggered by the floods at the end of the last ice age, an advanced society could disappear almost overnight. The survivors would remember the gods, remember that humans were made, and remember that life was once better, but the details would fade. Myth would take over where memory failed. Can genetics prove any of this? Not really. DNA breaks down, mutations pile up, and telling natural evolution apart from ancient bioengineering isn't easy. You'd need to spot something in our genes that just doesn't fit clear evidence of design. But here, the unsettling question: what if scientists have already seen those weird signatures? What if they've found genetic patterns no one can explain, and the results are so disruptive they're hidden away, sealed behind closed doors, because the truth would shake too many beliefs? Back in 2013, the NSA leak blew the lid off PRISM, a secret surveillance program that let the government quietly scoop up data from big internet companies. Suddenly, everyone realized just how much goes on behind closed doors out of sight, until someone brave enough brings it into the light. If governments can run massive secret projects for years, sometimes decades, without anyone knowing, who's to say the same can't happen with genetic research? Especially the kind of research that might shake our basic beliefs about where we come from, who we are, and whether there's something strange and ancient lurking in our DNA. Now imagine if scientists actually found evidence that someone, a long time ago, deliberately tinkered with our genes. It'd be a bombshell not just for science but for religion. Every creation story would need a rewrite. That idea of being made in God's image, suddenly up for debate. Maybe we were crafted by someone else entirely. And then, what do we call those beings, gods, or just really advanced life forms with a knack for genetic engineering? It gets even weirder when you think about the philosophy. If we're engineered, do we actually have free will, or are we just acting out someone else's blueprint? Are our thoughts and dreams really ours, or echoes of choices made by whoever designed us? Some old myths, like the one about the Anunnaki, claim humans were made as workers. If that's true, are we here to serve, not to thrive for our own sake? And then there's the politics. If genetic engineering made us what we are, what's stopping someone from creating post-humans, people who leave us in the dust, the way we outpaced our ancient ancestors? You can bet governments would race to build smarter, stronger, faster citizens. A new kind of inequality would show up, not about money or class or race, but about who's been modified and who hasn't. That kind of divide could tear society apart. So it makes sense that governments would want to keep this kind of discovery quiet, not just to cover things up, but because the fallout could be massive. It's safer, in a way, to stick to the story that we evolved naturally, that our DNA is sacred, that messing with it is playing God. Because once you admit we might already be the product of ancient engineering, it gets a whole lot harder to argue against doing it again. Of course, all this is just speculation. There's no solid proof that anyone's hiding classified genetic breakthroughs, but the logic tracks. History is full of examples. Look at the Manhattan Project, years of secret work before the world found out. Biological weapons research happens behind locked doors. Intelligence agencies keep their operations under wraps. If there's evidence out there that somebody engineered humans ages ago, that's about as sensitive as it gets. It touches everything: who we are, where we came from, and what it means to be human. And there have been some odd hints. In 2017, a study in the American Journal of Human Genetics looked at big structural quirks in our DNA, missing chunks, extra copies, the kind of stuff you can't just chalk up to normal mutations. Some of these changes are ancient, found in every human group, meaning they happened before we spread out from Africa. Others are more recent, popping up only in certain populations. Officially, the researchers played it safe. They said we need more data to figure out where these oddities came from and what they do. But if you dig into the supplemental data, you'll find DNA sequences that just don't fit, clean breakpoints, parts of the genome that seem to have been inserted instead of evolved, with no messy transition in between. The authors noticed these weird spots but didn't explain them, maybe because there's no simple answer. That paper barely made a ripple outside genetic circles. It got published, cited, and filed away in the mountain of research on human DNA. But what if those strange sequences are exactly what they look like? Insertions, genetic bits added to our DNA in the distant past. And what if the scientists who saw this realized how explosive it was and decided not to spell out what it could mean because the truth was just too wild? Picture this: you're a geneticist and you stumble on unmistakable signs of ancient genetic engineering in your data. You can't chalk these sequences up to random mutations. The odds just don't add up. They don't match any natural process you know either. Everything you've learned tells you these genes were deliberately altered. But if you go public with that theory, your career is over. No journal touches it. Your colleagues roll their eyes. Grants dry up. You're radioactive. So you play it safe. You log the weirdness. You write up the anomaly exactly as you found it, but you stay away from any wild explanations. Maybe down the line, someone else, someone with better tech, or working in a time when people are actually willing to ask tough questions, will pick up your work and go further. This is how science actually moves forward, not in big, dramatic eureka moments, but through these nagging glitches that don't fit the story everyone believes. Over time, the pile of weird data gets too big to ignore. Someone finally puts the pieces together and suggests a new way of looking at things. Old ideas fade as new generations come in with fewer preconceptions, and slowly, the whole field turns. Right now, we might be at the very start of one of those shifts, especially when it comes to where humans really come from. The clues are scattered, the stakes are enormous, and nobody wants to rethink what they know. But the questions keep coming up. Why do humans have so little genetic diversity? Why did modern behavior just explode onto the scene? What's with genes like FOXP2, which seem to have changed fast and with purpose? And why do ancient stories talk about humans being created, not just born? Sure, each of those questions has a standard answer. A climate disaster squeezed our gene pool. Culture hit some critical mass, and boom, modernity. FOXP2 just happened to be a really good mutation, so it spread fast. Ancient creation myths are just that, myths. But when you put all these questions together, the pattern gets hard to ignore. It starts to look like those ancient Sumerian texts might actually be onto something. Maybe humans really were modified. Maybe our DNA still carries the fingerprints of ancient bioengineers. Maybe, just maybe, we are what the tablets say. A blend of clay and something extraordinary, a biological base, upgraded with whatever made us capable of language, imagination, and civilization. Imagine the pre-dawn wind blowing across southern Iraq, stirring up sand that used to be the walls of Uruk or the streets of Ur. Beneath that sand, there are still tablets waiting to be dug up, still pressed with cuneiform that might spell out more about how we were made, who did it, and how. Meanwhile, in some lab, genomes sit in databases, their secrets half revealed, waiting for someone to notice the patterns and connect them to a story that started before history. Two archives 5,000 years apart, one in crumbling clay, one in cold silicon, both telling the same old story in different codes, both hinting that humans weren't just born, we were made. Hybrids, blending the biology of our ancestors with something else, something that evolution on its own just can't explain. No, the evidence isn't airtight. Maybe it never will be. If our genome was engineered, those traces are buried under ages of natural change. The tablets, as old and carefully kept as they are, only give us bits and pieces, legends filtered through the generations. We're trying to piece together something that happened tens of thousands of years ago, using tools that honestly weren't built for this kind of mystery. But still, the questions keep surfacing, and the story refuses to go away. So here's the question that just won't go away. It lingers in the background, somewhere between strings of DNA and those wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay so long ago. What if the Sumerians actually got it right? What if the Anunnaki, whatever they were, really did make us? And what if someone already stumbled across the evidence, tucked it away, and decided the world just wasn't ready for a story that would turn everything upside down? The pieces are out there. They sit in forgotten university stacks, in the shadows of museum storage rooms, deep in genomic archives, or on servers behind locked doors. Clay tablets still bear the fingerprints of scribes who lived 5,000 years ago, who wrote about gods needing humans from river mud and something more. DNA sequences hide strange markers, signs of someone tinkering with our genes, way before we think anyone could have. Two timelines, thousands of years apart, but they keep circling back to the same weird idea. We don't know who we are. Not really. Our origin stories got holes, missing pages. And if there's a truth out there, it keeps whispering from two places. In those ancient lines pressed into clay, and in the twisty code spiraling inside every cell, waiting for us to finally pay attention. Maybe we're almost there. Right now, somewhere, a scientist might be hunched over a screen, staring at sequences that just shouldn't exist, patterns that don't fit. Maybe they remember something they once read, a myth from Mesopotamia about gods mixing clay and spirit, and for the first time, they wonder if the story was more than a story. Clay remembers, DNA remembers, and while the night drags on and sleep feels far away, the question won't let go. Not just who are we, but what are we? If we're the result of some ancient experiment, then who did the engineering? Gods, aliens, some lost human race that built something incredible and then vanished. The Sumerians had a name, the Anunnaki. They said these beings came from the sky and made us, and they wrote it all down. Those tablets have survived everything: floods, wars, centuries of neglect. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't writing myths. Maybe it was the only way they knew to record a truth too big for their time, a truth about a genetic rewrite so wild it made us who we are. If the evidence is real, if someone already found it, then in some locked lab, researchers know. They've seen the sequences, run the numbers, compared them to what evolution should look like, and something doesn't add up. They keep it quiet, not because they're evil, but because the world just isn't ready. Because once this truth gets out, there's no going back. But secrets never stay buried forever. Whistleblowers talk. Classified files leak. Some researcher publishes a paper in a journal nobody reads, and suddenly someone asking the right questions. Little by little, the truth starts to bubble up. Maybe it's already happening. Maybe the clues are hiding in plain sight. Weird genetic codes, ancient texts that sound suspiciously technical, that uneasy sense that myth and science are starting to overlap. And maybe, one day, we'll finally see the whole picture. Who made us, how, and why? The story's already there, pressed into Sumerian clay, twisting through our chromosomes, just waiting for us to put it all together and realize both archives are telling the same story. The question hangs in the air. You feel it in labs where scientists run strands of DNA through machines, searching for answers no one's ready to say out loud. You see it in museums where ancient clay tablets sit in glass cases, silent, unread, but somehow restless. And sometimes when you can't sleep and the world's gone quiet, it slips into your thoughts. What if all those stories we've been told aren't quite right? What if there's something else, something old and true, that keeps whispering from the past? Imagine for a second, the evidence is already here. Maybe we've even found it. Maybe it's filed away in some locked drawer, classified, waiting for a time when we're ready to handle it. Maybe the answer to humanity's oldest question has already been written, and we just haven't been trusted with it yet. The tablets won't say more. Their message was baked into clay 5,000 years ago by hands that believed they were saving the truth for the future. DNA won't break its silence either. Its secrets are wound up in molecules, quietly waiting for the right tools, maybe the right eyes, to pick out the fingerprints of ancient meddling. Somewhere between these two, between the first stories humans ever wrote and the code that built us, the answer sits. And maybe, just quietly, someone's already found it. Maybe there are researchers who know but can't speak, institutions that have to keep it quiet, a hidden world where people know what the rest of us don't. We're hybrids. We were made. The ones who made us left their names in our cells. If that's true, if the proof is real and locked away, then we're all part of the biggest secret in history. It's in our bodies, spelled out in molecules, hinted at in old tablets, and buried under layers of official silence. It's a secret that would topple textbooks, shake up religions, and force us to face the idea that we're not accidents, not just the result of chance, but the product of intention. Designed, created, changed, made. Meanwhile, the desert wind never stops. It sweeps over Sumer's ruins, carrying bits of sand that used to be mud bricks, that used to be walls and temples and archives. Under that wind, under all that sand, the tablets wait, patient, quiet, still holding out their story for anyone willing to listen and believe. Tonight, as you drift off, maybe that story will find you, not as a final answer, but as a question that lingers in the dark. Who are we really? Is the story we've been told complete, or is there something missing in the code of our DNA? Something ancient researchers have already seen, but can't quite explain. The mixing of Earth and something more. The making of a species that, by all odds, shouldn't exist, but does. Maybe in dreams, where myth and memory blend together, you'll get a glimpse of what the Sumerians saw. Not gods in the way we imagine, but makers, engineers, beings who took what was here and made it into something new. Something that could ask questions like this. Something that carries the signature of its making deep in its own code, waiting for the day when someone's ready to see it. Until that day, the silence holds. The files stay locked. The evidence sits in encrypted databases, and the tablets lie in their cushioned trays, fingerprints still pressed in clay by scribes who knew they were recording something important, something real, something that would outlast kings, languages, even the memory of the gods themselves. But the words are still there, cuneiform pressed in neat lines, spelling out that humans were made, that our making was a process, a mix, a deliberate act, that the ones who made us, the Anunnaki, left their mark in both ancient texts and the very molecules that build our bodies. If someone's already found that mark, if geneticists have seen it and recognized it for what it is, then the only question left is when. When will someone finally say it out loud? When will the world get to see what's already known in secret? Maybe never. Some secrets stay buried for a reason, but sometimes they slip out. A researcher who can't keep quiet anymore, a file that gets leaked, a pattern in the data that just won't stay hidden. And if that moment comes, everything changes. Every idea about what makes us special, about where we came from, about what we are, suddenly up for grabs. Nothing will stay the same. We have to face it. Maybe we're not the crowning achievement of nature. Maybe we're more like the result of some ancient experiment, tweaked and built by beings whose intentions we can only imagine. Gods, aliens, maybe a lost civilization that got so far ahead, their story vanished from our memory. The old tablets don't spell it out. All they say is that the Anunnaki came down from the sky, made humans, and then left after the flood. But their fingerprints are everywhere. You feel it in every thought, every word. It's right there in our DNA, ticking away in every cell, shaping what we are, creatures of language and invention. If someone found proof of this ancient engineering and locked it away, then we're all walking around carrying a secret, never knowing what we're actually hiding. We're living evidence of a story that flips everything we've learned on its head. Night settles in, sleep creeps closer, and just before you drift off, when you're floating between what you know and what you wonder, this question lingers. It doesn't shout or demand, it just waits. Maybe someone already found the answer, tucked away in some top-secret archive, known to a handful of people and hidden from everyone else. What if scientists already uncovered traces of Anunnaki DNA and just buried the evidence? What if you carry that proof inside you, right now, locked in your cells, waiting for the day that science and myth finally line up? Imagine what the tablets have been trying to say from the start. We were made. The process left marks, and those marks, if we bother to look, could show us exactly what happened. We're clay, sure, but mixed with something otherworldly. Earth, but upgraded. Hybrids built for reasons we still don't get, by beings whose faces we'll probably never see. Maybe the proof is already found. Maybe the files are already locked down. Maybe the truth is already out there, just out of reach. Somewhere in the enormous world of genetic research, cold labs, blinking servers, locked archives, the truth waits, still as a tablet buried in sand. Quiet as DNA twisted deep in your cells, as real as your next breath, which passes through a body carrying the blueprint of your origins, written in the language of code. But before you slip all the way into sleep, Before the mystery slides into dreams, there's more to piece together. Fragments scattered across both the latest genetics labs and the oldest libraries, waiting for someone to stitch them into a story that finally makes sense of both the mud and the miracle. Back in 2015, a group of evolutionary biologists at Stanford put out a study that barely made a ripple outside their field. They've been studying a gene called HAR1, Human Accelerated Region 1. This isn't a typical gene. It doesn't make a protein. It's more like a control switch, a stretch of DNA that tells other genes when to switch on or off during brain development. And it's one of the fastest changing bits of DNA in the human genome. Here, what's wild? If you line up HAR1 in chickens and chimpanzees, two species split by 300 million years, you'll see just two tiny differences in 118 DNA letters. Two. But between chimps and humans, who split only 6 million years ago, there are 18 changes. 18 in a blink of evolutionary time. It's a speed-up that doesn't make sense with what we know about evolution. And HAR1 isn't the lone anomaly. Scientists have found dozens of these HARs, regions that change dramatically and quickly, but only in humans. Many play a role in brain development, especially in building the neocortex, the part of our brain that lets us think, speak, imagine, the stuff that makes us human. The Stanford team didn't go down the rabbit hole of why this happened. They stuck to the facts, they laid out the numbers and left it at that. But the real question hangs in the air. How do you get 18 precise changes in just the right places in a stretch of DNA that rewires our brains, when for eons before, almost nothing changed at all? Natural selection working on random mutations just can't make this happen. For this pattern to appear, you'd need a string of mutations, each one good enough to take over the population before the next even shows up. And there's just not enough time. Even if you got a brain-boosting mutation in every single generation, which is basically impossible, 6 million years doesn't give you enough generations for random chance to stack up 18 specific changes. Unless the changes weren't actually random. What if something was calling the shots, picking out the exact sequences, making targeted tweaks, building an outcome that evolution on its own just can't pull off in that time frame? There's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, tucked away in a small office, who keeps a photo on her desk, a clay tablet from Nippur. She worked on translating it back when she was just starting out. The tablet holds a piece of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian story of creation, with roots that go deep into Sumerian tradition. But here's the weird part. In the margin, almost invisible, is a note from a scribe scribbled centuries after the original. It's a single cramped line in cuneiform, and it goes something like this. The old words contained instructions. We copy them, though we no longer understand their full meaning. She spent 40 years poring over Mesopotamian texts, and that one note won't leave her alone. It hints that even way back then, even with all the careful copying and preserving, the real meaning was already slipping away. The scribes knew the tablets mattered, but they couldn't really grasp what they were preserving. They weren't writers, they were keepers, guardians of knowledge that had already started to fade. So, what if the creation stories are just that? What if the Sumerians inherited them from some pre-flood culture? The people who built the deepest layers under their cities? And what if those lost, original texts actually held technical knowledge about genetic engineering? Maybe that knowledge eroded as it got passed down until all that was left was myth. The gods mixing clay with divine essence. Failed attempts, then success. The details vanished, but the process stayed. Try explaining CRISPR to someone who's never heard of DNA or molecules or biology at all. You'd end up saying something like, we take the essence of life, add new instructions, and create beings with new abilities. You talk about failures, about mistakes and corrections, about getting it right in the end. If you didn't have the words, your explanation would sound magical, legendary. But the real story would still be there, hidden inside the language, just waiting for someone to see it. Maybe that's exactly what the Sumerian texts are, real descriptions, filtered through ancient limits. And now, if modern researchers are seeing genetic features that look engineered instead of evolved, ancient DNA sequences that don't fit the random pattern, maybe the old stories and the new science are telling the same thing from two sides. We were made. Our DNA holds the proof. And the record, sitting there in clay tablets, 5,000 years old, just waiting for us to figure out how to read both sets of clues and realize they're describing the same event. Back in 2019, a geneticist at the Salk Institute in California found something she hasn't told the world about. She was looking at heterochromatin, DNA packed so tightly that it was long thought to be useless junk. But with new ways to map the 3D structure of chromosomes, she spotted something strange. In certain parts of our heterochromatin, there are sequences that show up in every human population, but not in any other primate. These aren't genes. They're like scaffolding, bits that help organize how chromosomes fold up and how faraway genes talk to each other. What really made her stop and stare was the precision. Those sequences always show up in the same spots, on the same chromosomes, with edges so crisp they look like someone cut and pasted them in. It's as if someone opened up the genome, figured out exactly where the framework needed help, and dropped in the new pieces. She checked and rechecked, thinking maybe the sequencing equipment was making mistakes, but the pattern never changed. The sequences are real. They're unique to humans. And honestly, they look designed. She talked things over with her colleagues behind closed doors. Some of them blamed contamination, though nobody could really explain how you get the same exact patterns popping up in hundreds of DNA samples from people all over the world. Others floated this idea about ancient viral insertions, maybe just a freak coincidence. But that didn't hold up. Statistically, it was impossible. One night, a colleague stayed late in the lab to look at her data. The place was empty. He said something that stuck with her. What if you found exactly what it looks like? What if these are edit markers, evidence that somebody tinkered with the human genome, and those markers are the signatures they left behind? She never published her findings. The data wasn't wrong. She just couldn't come up with any way to explain it that wouldn't end her career. You don't put out a paper saying you found signs of ancient genetic engineering. You don't tell people the human genome has insertion sites that look designed, not evolved. Not if you care about your job, your grants, or your reputation. Science has its boundaries, and this kind of talk crosses the line. So the data sits. It's backed up, encrypted, hidden away. And sometimes late at night when the lab is quiet except for the low hum of the freezers keeping cell cultures alive at -80, she opens those files and stares at the sequences again. The boundaries are clean, the locations precise. Each one shows up only in humans and you find them in every population. They look like signatures, someone's name, written right into the genome. If this kind of evidence exists, if more than one researcher, working independently, has spotted genetic markers that point to ancient modification, then the real question is the evidence real? It's what happens when we can't ignore it anymore? When so many strange findings pile up that the old explanations just don't work? When the simplest answer, the one that fits the facts, is that maybe the Sumerian tablets had it right all along? Before Baghdad's museums were torn apart by decades of chaos, there were tablets tucked away in their collections that almost nobody from the West ever bothered to study. Not because they were worthless, but because they were broken, hard to translate, and covered topics that didn't fit into any neat box. Take one tablet, labeled IM 67421. It looked like it was just medical advice, treatments for illnesses, herbal remedies, surgery tips. But then, buried in the medical instructions, you'd find things that made no sense. Passages about bloodlines that mustn't mix, warnings to keep different kinds separate. There were instructions for spotting people with special qualities in their blood, using physical signs, behavior, and something called seed strength, a phrase that doesn't really mean anything in regular Sumerian medicine. Back in the 1980s, a researcher read that tablet and wrote in his notes that it sounded less like a doctor's guide and more like a manual for breeding. Like the Sumerians were hand-picking people for certain traits, making sure the right ones had kids and keeping others apart. He never published that idea. It was too wild, too easy for people to dismiss as just reading modern science into old stories. But he was right. If the Anunnaki did tweak early humans, giving us a boost in intelligence or whatever else, they'd run into a problem. How do you make those changes stick? How do you stop the gene pool from getting watered down every time someone new comes along? The answer is pretty simple. You select. You choose who gets to pass on their genes and who doesn't. That's probably what the Sumerian tablets are describing. Instructions handed down from the Anunnaki, teaching early humans how to keep the modifications going through careful breeding. And if those instructions survived, copied and recopied by people who forgot what they were for, they'd look a lot like IM 67421, a medical text with weird notes about bloodlines and seed strength, kept around because everyone knew it mattered, even if nobody remembered why. Back in 2021, when the pandemic was at its worst, big pharmaceutical companies were in a mad rush to create mRNA vaccines. This technology was wild, totally new. Instead of using dead or weakened viruses, it sent synthetic genetic instructions right into people's cells. Suddenly, your body knew how to make a protein that would kick your immune system into gear. And it worked. Fast. Within months, billions rolled up their sleeves and got those shots. For a moment, their cells changed how they operated, just long enough to fight off the virus. But underneath the relief, something a little unsettling showed up. Changing human biology. Turns out it's not that hard. Sure, the mRNA vaccines didn't mess with anyone's DNA for good. The instructions broke down and faded after doing their job. Still, the main point stuck. You can send artificial genetic instructions into a human cell. You can make it do things it was never designed to do. And if you keep pushing the technology, get a little more advanced, you could make those tweaks last forever. We're already close. CRISPR gene editing lets scientists rewrite DNA permanently. Remember the Chinese researcher who gave twin embryos resistance to HIV? He broke every rule and got shunned, but the genie's out of the bottle. Now, CRISPR is just another tool in labs everywhere. The science isn't mysterious anymore. The only thing holding people back is what's legal or ethical. But what happens if those lines blur? Pressure from rival countries, military interests, or just plain curiosity, those can push researchers to cross lines. Imagine if genetic enhancement isn't some far-off sci-fi, but something happening right now, behind closed doors, hidden away from the public. We'd be doing exactly what those old Sumerian stories talk about, making new kinds of humans, people with abilities that go way beyond what's natural. And this time, we'd be doing it on purpose, using tools we invented in barely 100 years of genetic research. If we got this far so quickly, what could a civilization do with thousands of years to play with biology? What if the Anunnaki from those old legends weren't gods or aliens, but humans? Imagine an ancient civilization that figured out genetic modification by watching, experimenting, and learning over centuries. Not by peering into microscopes, but by messing with breeding and inheritance. To everyone who came later, they'd look like magicians. Their science would seem like pure magic. Their talent for shaping life would be impossible to explain. When everything fell apart, their cities wiped out by floods, most of their people gone, maybe a few survivors clung to scraps of knowledge. Not the full picture. That needs universities, libraries, generations of experts, but stories, memories, maybe even a few practical tricks, passed down by word of mouth until people learned to write again. Then scribes, realizing these tales were important even if they didn't understand them, pressed them into clay tablets. You don't need space aliens or gods for this story. Just an advanced human civilization that took a different route than we did. They figured out genetics by watching nature, not by sequencing DNA. And before everything collapsed, they used that wisdom to change themselves and their children. If that happened, the clues would look the same. Bits of our DNA that seem designed, not evolved. Genetic patterns that hint at deliberate tinkering. But the hands behind them weren't alien. They were human, just not our kind of human, a previous version, a lost cycle that reached its peak, then vanished when disaster hit. Sometimes late at night, when museums are dark and the archives are quiet, you can almost feel those lost voices in the air. The Anunnaki, speaking through clay tablets written thousands of years after their cities disappeared. Sumerian scribes called them gods. What else would you call people who could rewrite life? Maybe their legacy still lives inside us, in every cell, waiting for someone to recognize it. Maybe some researchers have already seen the signs, but no one's ready to say it out loud. The evidence trickles in piece by piece. A weird genetic sequence here, a confusing line in an ancient text there, fragments that don't fit the official story but won't go away either. And slowly a new picture starts to take shape. Not finished, not fully proven, but stubborn. No matter how uncomfortable it gets, it won't just disappear. What if we really are modified organisms? What if our DNA carries fingerprints from some ancient tinkering? Maybe the Sumerians weren't just spinning stories. Maybe their myths and rituals actually preserved the memory of something that happened. And now, as geneticists dig into the code of life, what if they're quietly bumping into the same truth those old stories tried to tell us? That we were made, that the making left marks. And that, if we're brave enough to see them, those marks will force us to rethink everything we believe about who we are and where we came from. Picture the desert wind in southern Iraq, still sweeping over the land, picking up particles from the ruins of Sumerian mudbrick. Under all that sand, more tablets wait, untouched, unread. Maybe they hold more details about how humans came to be, about what the Anunnaki did and how they did it. Meanwhile, in labs across the planet, DNA sequencers hum along, decoding genomes at breakneck speed, stumbling onto patterns that just don't fit the official story, oddities that hint at something nobody wants to say out loud. On one side, ancient clay tablets. On the other, digital data from state-of-the-art machines. They're separated by thousands of years, but they both seem to be pointing in the same direction. And right there, hanging between them, is the question that might change everything. Are we ready to know? Ready to face the idea that our story isn't what we thought? That we're not just the product of random evolution, but of deliberate intervention? That our very cells carry the legacy of the Anunnaki, whoever they were? Does it matter if we're ready? Honestly, the evidence won't wait for our comfort. If it's real, it'll come out through leaks, whistleblowers, heated debates, or just a steady trickle of weird data points piling up until denial just isn't an option anymore. And when that happens, if it hasn't already, behind closed doors in some classified lab, the whole game changes. Every idea about what makes us unique, every belief about our place in the universe, every certainty about our beginnings, they all get thrown back on the table. Those Sumerian tablets, shrugged off for generations as colorful myths, might finally get recognized for what they could be: records. The oldest surviving testimony about an event that science is only now catching up to. In a strange way, it's like the Sumerians have been waiting 5,000 years for us to catch up, waiting for science to get good enough to test what their tablets claimed, waiting for us to find, written into our genes, the proof of what they pressed into clay. For us to finally connect the dots, closing the circle between ancient memory and modern discovery. A journey that started when someone first pressed a wedge into wet earth and wrote. After kingship descended from heaven, after the gods mixed clay with the divine, humans were made. So maybe tonight, as you drift toward sleep, this question will follow you into the dark. Not as proof, not as certainty, but as a mystery that won't shut up, a whisper from both clay and code. Maybe, just maybe, the oldest story we have is the real one, that we were made, that the makers signed their work in our DNA. And that signature, if we dare to read it, will tell us exactly what the Anunnaki wanted us to know. They came, they changed us, they left, and here we are, their legacy, walking the earth with minds that leap far beyond what evolution alone could explain, carrying DNA that looks like it was built, not just born, and holding onto ancient stories that remember an event so deep it made us who we are. For all we know, someone already found the evidence. Maybe the categories are already drawn up. Maybe a handful of scientists, locked in by non-disclosure agreements and government orders, already know the truth and can't say a word. But secrets never last forever. Time and truth, they always catch up. And someday, maybe for us, maybe for the next generation, the full story will come out. And when it does, people won't turn first to scientific journals. They'll look back at the ancient texts, the Sumerian tablets, the Akkadian stories, all those dusty records that waited in museum drawers for their moment. For the day when we're finally ready to listen to what the ancients tried so hard to save. We're clay with a spark of the divine earth, but touched by something from the sky. Maybe we're the end result of experiments by the Anunnaki. Some called them gods, some say aliens, maybe just an earlier branch of humanity wiped out by floods and time. Whoever they were, they existed. They knew how to tinker with genes and they pulled it off. They built us, a species that's taken over this planet in a way nothing else ever managed. If the DNA proof is already out there, tucked away and classified, if scientists know all this but can't say a word, then honestly, our ignorance is kind of tragic. The truth's already out, hiding in plain sight. You can see it in cuneiform pressed into clay 5,000 years ago. You can see it in our DNA, winding through every cell. 2 ancient languages, one on clay tablets, one written in the code inside us. Both waiting for us to get smart enough to read and realize they're telling the same story. We were made. The evidence is here. The record survived. The truth sits somewhere in the space between old stories and locked-up research files. It waits patient as centuries, quiet as the DNA in our bones, stubborn as that nagging question that keeps you up at night. What if the Anunnaki DNA was found and just hidden away? What if it's inside you right now in every cell? What if someone, known for decades, but the truth stays buried behind locked doors and official silence? And what if the only thing holding it back is fear? Fear of what it would change, fear of what it would mean, fear of admitting that we're not who we thought we were. But here's the thing, secrets crumble, fear fades. Truth leaks out slow but steady like water finding a crack. It's not a question of if this comes out, it's when. And when it does, will we realize the answer was right in front of us? Written in the world's oldest script and in the newest code we know, waiting all these thousands of years for science and ancient stories to finally shake hands. There's more too. More genes, more clues. Scientists in labs across the US and Europe have found a whole cluster of genes tied to how our brains developed. HAR1, ASPM, MCPH1. These genes control brain size, and they didn't change slowly. They mutated fast in bursts, right when humans started acting modern. Each shift made our brains bigger, our thinking more complex. Back in 2006, researchers at the University of Chicago dug into these genes across different groups of people. The latest mutations, the ones that made our brains what they are now, popped up about 50,000 years ago. But here's the weird part. They didn't spread everywhere. Some groups have these gene versions a lot, others barely at all. It's like someone made changes for certain people, and those changes spread as people moved and mixed, but never reached everyone. The scientists played it safe. They talked about natural selection. Maybe bigger brains helped in some places, maybe not in others. Climate, resources, social life, the usual suspects. But the numbers hinted at something else. The way these genes show up doesn't really fit the old models. It looks less like nature picking favorites and more like someone deliberately tweaking certain groups, maybe those who met the Anunnaki, and the changes drifted out from there. Of course, you can't publish that theory. No journal wants to hear about brain genes pointing to ancient engineers, but the data doesn't care. It just sits there, open to anyone who wants to look. Patterns that don't quite fit the stories we've told ourselves. The team put out their findings in a technical paper about recombination rates. They didn't guess why some genes had such odd, tight linkage. They just laid out the data, pointed out the weirdness, and moved on. Still, the real question hovered in the background. If these genetic sequences looked freshly inserted, if they didn't show the usual patterns of shuffling and mixing, maybe they didn't come about naturally. Maybe someone or something put them there, skipping the usual rules of evolution. Picture yourself as a geneticist in 2024, sitting in a bustling university lab, sifting through human genome data at a level of detail that would have sounded like science fiction a few years ago. You spot patterns, insertions that seem intentional, bits of DNA that don't fit any evolutionary model you know, genes that look recently tweaked, and they all cluster around the traits that make us distinctly human: language, abstract thought, technology. You can't talk about this. Publishing it would be career suicide. Your grants would vanish. You get branded a crackpot, cut off from colleagues in the only world you've known. So you do what anyone in your shoes would do. You keep records carefully, privately. You encrypt everything. You wait, hoping that someday, when enough odd findings pile up, when the scientific mood finally shifts, your work will help tip the scales. And when things get quiet, you wonder, how many scientists out there have stumbled across the same clues? How many geneticists worldwide have found hints of ancient engineering but keep it locked away? How much evidence is already out there, scattered across secret files and unpublished data, all waiting for the day when silence just isn't an option anymore? This is how science changes, not with big, dramatic announcements, but with the slow buildup of data that just doesn't fit. Anomalies stack up. Scientists start whispering in hallways. The stuff that can't be published gets passed around quietly. Then eventually, someone takes the leap and says what everyone's been thinking: the old theory doesn't work anymore. The evidence demands a new story. It's time to rethink everything. Maybe we're right on the edge of that in genetics, in archaeology, in figuring out where we come from. The weird data keeps coming. The whispers are getting harder to ignore. And those Sumerian tablets collecting dust in museum vaults for a century might hold the missing piece. They've been telling us from the start, we were made. The makers left clues, and those clues are right there, written in our DNA. We just needed the tech to read them. Back before unrest closed off the Egyptian Museum in Cairo for years, there was a papyrus scroll, tucked away and mostly ignored, Papyrus 1842. It was in rough shape, just fragments cataloged and forgotten. The parts you could still read looked like medical advice, not so different from other Egyptian texts, until you looked closer. Unlike the usual remedies and surgeries, this one talked about inheritance. Not property or royal lines, but biological inheritance. How traits pass from parents to kids, looks, smarts, even personality. The text described these things as carried in blood, which made sense to the Egyptians at the time. It laid out, in its way, instructions for selective breeding, how to keep the good traits and get rid of the bad. One part, damaged but pieced together from the context, spoke of children born from unions between those with divine blood and regular folk. The children, it said, would have abilities from both sides, but the special qualities would fade over generations unless you kept marrying others with divine blood. It's almost exactly how you describe genetic modifications getting diluted by mixing with an unmodified population. Nobody ever finished translating the papyrus. It was seen as an oddity, maybe an early idea about heredity, but nothing important. No one thought to connect it to the Sumerian texts that also talked about keeping bloodlines pure and maintaining the seed. Nobody noticed that, separated by thousands of miles and centuries, these cultures described the same practice, carefully breeding to keep modifications, handed down from beings they called gods. Put Papyrus 1842 next to Baghdad's tablet IM 67421. Look at the Egyptian talk about divine blood and the Sumerian focus on seed strength. Suddenly, you see it, a pattern hiding in plain sight. Both ancient cultures believed people didn't all have the same blood. Some folks came from unions with the gods, others didn't, and who you married mattered. They worked hard to keep these bloodlines separate, not out of superstition, but because they saw it as necessary. This isn't just myth-making or fairy tales. These are early attempts at describing genetics, maintenance of traits, using the only language they had: blood. Jump over to India's Mahabharata. That epic spells out how the Devas, gods, slept with humans and produced heroes with abilities off the charts. Arjuna, Krishna, the Pandavas, they all trace their roots to divine fathers and human mothers. The text doesn't mince words. This bloodline gave them superhuman strength, longer lives, powers that regular people just didn't have. These hybrids weren't like everyone else. They were better. You see the same storyline everywhere. Genesis talks about the sons of God marrying human women and giving rise to the Nephilim, mighty men of old. Greek tales are packed with gods fathering children with mortals. Think Hercules or Perseus, heroes who could do things no mortal could dream of. Norse, Celtic, Native American traditions. It's all there, just dressed up in different clothes. Most people say these stories are just ways to explain why some people are extraordinary. But what if that's only part of it? What if the reason these stories are so similar, so persistent, is because they're protecting a memory? Maybe there really were beings who mixed with early humans, and those kids genuinely had enhanced abilities, because their DNA was different. The divine parent brings in unique genes, the human parent supplies the basics, and the result is a child who outpaces both. Modern genetics backs this up. Hybrid vigor is real. Mix two isolated gene pools and the kids can end up healthier, stronger, smarter. That's why genetic diversity matters so much. Crossbreeding sometimes unlocks traits that neither side had alone. So if the Anunnaki really did mate with early humans, the results would look exactly like what those ancient stories describe. People with rare strengths, abilities that stand out, and genetic tweaks that could spread through generations or vanish if not carefully preserved. The old myths talk about pure bloodlines, legendary heroes, and the slow loss of power as divine blood mixes with the rest. That's genetic drift, recounted in song and story. The language is myth, but the concept is genetics. And the fact that you see it everywhere, cultures separated by oceans, time, and language, makes you wonder if they're all trying to remember the same thing. Enhanced beings, human partners, hybrid offspring, lost abilities. It's the oldest story we have, hidden in plain sight. Fast forward to now, somewhere in the US. No one's saying where. A government lab has been running a program for decades. Officially, it's about curing genetic disease. Quietly, there's another goal: improvement. Not just fixing what's broken, but upgrading the human blueprint. Stronger immune systems, faster healing, sharper minds, longer lives. The researchers aren't starting from scratch. They're looking at people who already have rare advantages. There are folks who never seem to get sick, who stay sharp into old age, who recover from injuries faster than anyone else. The lab is tracking down the genes responsible, figuring out if they can give these traits to others who didn't win the genetic lottery. It's not myth anymore, it's science. And it's happening right now. The work drags on, slow and deliberate. There's a shield of secrecy around everything, layers of classification on top of more layers. Nothing gets published. When someone makes a breakthrough, it's only shared inside this tight circle of institutions, all locked down and sworn to silence. Still, progress sneaks forward. Techniques get sharper. People start to understand things they didn't before. And eventually, you can't avoid the big question. If we can change human genes to stop disease, what's stopping us from tweaking them to unlock abilities humans never had? Could we actually do what those old Sumerian tablets claim the Anunnaki did? Engineer people to go beyond what's natural? Honestly, the answer is yes. We know CRISPR works. Remember that Chinese scientist who altered embryos to resist HIV? He proved you can make targeted changes in real living embryos. The tools are here. What stands in the way now? Ethics, laws, social norms. But in these classified programs hidden from the public, those things are flexible, negotiable even. People whisper about what's happening. You hear rumors at conferences, stories from scientists who used to be on the inside but moved on. They talk about successes no one can officially confirm, about people walking around with genetic tweaks that give them an edge. It's all happening in the shadows, while on the surface, everyone's still debating if it's right or wrong to enhance humans at all. There's no way to prove these stories. The programs are locked down tight. Researchers sign their silence away. Any real evidence, if it's out there, sits locked in vaults journalists and oversight committees can't touch. But honestly, the logic's hard to ignore. If it's possible, if military and intelligence agencies have a reason to chase it, if they've spent decades and piles of money on this, you can bet human enhancement isn't just a theory. It's real. The only thing nobody knows is just how far it's gone. How many enhanced people are out there? Are they still just lab subjects, monitored every second? Or have the changes gotten subtle, boosts to the immune system, tweaks to brain processing, enough that these people slip through society like anyone else, only their creators and maybe themselves knowing the truth? If these programs actually exist, if classified labs are already producing genetically enhanced humans, then we've already crossed the line the Sumerians wrote about. We're playing the same game as the Anunnaki, rewriting the code to upgrade ourselves. All the public debates, the moral panic, the religious arguments, they're just the cleanup crew. The real choice isn't about whether to start. It's about whether to admit we've already started. Picture the wind sweeping over Iraq before dawn, the sand shifting over ruins no one's seen in thousands of years. Somewhere under all that dust, ancient tablets wait, unread since the world was a different place. Maybe they hold instructions, warnings, notes on how humans were made. Meanwhile, in labs nobody talks about, in buildings you won't find on any map, scientists stay up all night. They sequence DNA, hunt for strange patterns, look for clues that someone tinkered with our genes long ago. And they do some tweaking of their own, carrying on work that, if the stories are true, started 50,000 years back when the Anunnaki got creative. So you've got two worlds, separated by ages, both chasing the same thing. One group desperately recorded knowledge they barely understood. The other is piecing it together again, using machines and code, retracing steps that were already taken once, lost, and now maybe found again. If scientists have uncovered genetic evidence, if our DNA really does show signs of ancient engineering, then the truth already sits in classified files, sequences that don't match what evolution predicts, patterns that look deliberate, not random. Maybe those old tablets weren't just myths, but records of something that actually happened. Secrets like that don't stay buried forever. There are too many researchers, too much data, too many chances for the truth to slip out. Sooner or later, someone's going to publish or leak or just refuse to stay silent. And when that happens, the whole conversation changes. We won't be asking if humans were genetically modified. We'll be asking when, by whom, and why. The Sumerian tablets set the stage for this whole conversation. They've just been waiting, silent and patient, for the day science finally caught up, when we'd get smart enough to read the genetic code and match it with the stories pressed into clay a few thousand years ago. Maybe you feel it right now, as you're drifting off, mind getting hazy. It's that weird sense of standing right on the edge, between what you've always been told and what might actually be real, between the comfort of old stories and the weird, unsettling possibility that the evidence is about to flip the script. You're carrying that evidence in every cell, 3 billion base pairs coiled up in each nucleus. Most of it, sure, is standard issue, shared with chimps, passed down from ancestors we barely have names for. But there are stretches of DNA that make us human. Language, abstract thought, the urge to invent. Those bits might not be random at all. Maybe they're edits, tweaks made by the beings Sumerians call the Anunnaki. Maybe those changes still run, generation after generation, doing exactly what they were designed to do. So what does that make you? If you really are a modified organism, carrying some ancient engineer's blueprint, does that mean you're natural, artificial? Are you a product of evolution, or did someone design you? Are you human the way you always thought, or some kind of hybrid, something that wouldn't even exist if not for someone reaching in and changing the code? It's not simple. Our usual categories, natural or artificial, evolved or designed, kind of fall apart when you're talking about changes that happened so far back. They're just part of what we are now. The lines blur when the engineering happened 50,000 years ago and never stopped being passed down. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not about how we got here, but what we do with it once we know. If we learn we're engineered, does that make us less valuable? Does it change our rights, our dignity, what we're worth? Or does it just flip our relationship with the universe, from random accidents to deliberate creations, made for some purpose we're still trying to figure out? The Sumerians thought that purpose was work. We were made to labor, to keep civilization running, while the Anunnaki took it easy. Not exactly a heroic origin story. It doesn't put humanity at the center of anything. It makes us tools built to serve someone else's needs. But that's not the end of it. Purposes change. Tools get repurposed. Even if we started out made to serve, we've blown past that original job description. We built civilizations the Anunnaki never dreamed of. We've invented technology that might even rival theirs. Now we're the ones editing genes, creating new species, maybe even engineering our own future descendants. If we're tools that woke up, started asking questions, and decided to write our own story. Maybe that's the real legacy the Anunnaki left behind. Not just the DNA tweaks, but the ability to become more than what we were designed to be. To take what they gave us and use it for things they never expected. To become, eventually, their equals. Night settles in. The question sits there heavy, layering itself over your thoughts. And in that quiet, there's a strange kind of peace. Because whether we're products of evolution or someone's experiment, whether our DNA holds the fingerprints of ancient engineers or not, we're still here, still conscious, still asking questions, still wondering where we came from. If there's evidence, we'll find it. If the truth is in our DNA, we'll read it sooner or later. And the Sumerian tablets, waiting in their quiet museum drawers, will be there when we're finally ready to listen to what they've been saying all along. For now, sleep comes easy, carrying you down into dreams where the questions fade into images. The tablets rest in their trays, fingerprints pressed in clay by hands long gone. Your DNA keeps spinning out instructions, written long before your family line even began. Two archives, two histories, both waiting for us to catch up. Somewhere in that space where ancient stories collide with modern science, the truth about where we came from just sits there. Not proven, not settled, but impossible to ignore. It lingers in the data, hums through the old clay tablets, nudging at this wild idea that maybe we aren't who we think we are. Maybe the oldest story is the right one. Maybe we were made. And the proof, it's already out there, just tucked away, waiting until we're actually ready to see it. Get some sleep. The question isn't going anywhere. The tablets will last. Our DNA isn't fading. And when you wake up next morning or years from now, the truth will still be there. Cuneiform and chromosomes holding on through the centuries, still waiting for someone to finally pay attention. What if we already found Anunnaki DNA and just locked it away? What if the answer really is yes? And what if, deep down, you already know it's true, that the Sumerian story never stopped being real? Maybe that's why this question haunts you, why it clings to your thoughts as you drift off, like a whisper from hands pressed into clay, like a secret code winding through your cells. Too huge to say out loud, too stubborn to forget. The evidence exists, the records are safe, truth doesn't vanish, and you carry it all in your body and your questions as the night finally pulls you under. Go on, sleep. The question will be waiting when you wake up, written in your DNA, baked into ancient clay. Patient, stubborn, and ready for the day we finally listen to what the Anunnaki left behind. That we're theirs, that we were made, and that the evidence, if we're willing to look, has always been right here, already found, already written down, already known, just waiting for us to finally see it.